Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar brought to you by Isaka and Noria. A lovely Wednesday night for this. The topic for tonight, how do you secure the data you don't know you have? Some housekeeping rules as always. Please make sure that your name appears on Teams, which is the same as your first name, last name used for registration. This, of course, is needed for CPE point. The presentation is recorded, so it will be on YouTube afterwards. The slide will also be delivered to you guys in PDF afterwards, as always. Please keep your microphone on mute. If you have any questions, feel free to put them on the chat, and also please keep your camera off where possible. And if you have any questions during it, you can just put it in the type or use the raise your hand feature. Tonight, we've got two speakers from EY, Ayse and Jatin. They'll tell us a little bit about themselves in a bit. And of course, next week, we have intelligence-driven cyber defense from Euro. So also please keep in mind to register for that. Ayse and Jatin, I'm then giving the sharing screen over to you guys, and good luck.
Thank you very much. So, Jatin, would you like to just start with a brief introduction from your side?
Absolutely, Ayse. Thank you. So my name is Jatin Sehgal. I'm a partner based in EY office of Amsterdam. I focus on the cybersecurity topic and data privacy. I also happen to be the global ISO leader for EY's certification body called EY CertifyPoint. And in that capacity, I'm performing a lot of ISO 27001 cloud security and data privacy audits for some of the global organizations around the world, mainly on the technology side, but also on the financial services side.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm Ayse Yavuz, and I am an associate partner within EY CertifyPoint, the certification by the ISO Center of Excellence of EY, as well as I'm an associate partner within EY Consulting, where I have the responsibility also to lead the privacy as a topic together with the privacy community. So actually today we are starting with a question. How do you secure the data you do not know you have? And we chose this question for a good reason, because we're experiencing this with a lot of organizations. When we are so much focused either on compliance or really on the technical side with controls, sometimes organizations miss to ask very basic questions. And today we would like to talk about just a foundation that can really help this. Also just the organization to step back and then think about the basics and then follow this step by step, ensuring the compliance, but also ensuring the solid controls. But most importantly, creating a governance around it. And to tell about this foundation, we're going to use ISO as a leading practice as well as a standard practice, but we're open to have obviously discussions with you if you also have experiences to share or questions to ask. So yes, so what about our agenda? So our agenda, like we have 3 main points. So we would like to start with some key concepts. I am sure most of you are already very familiar with this. And it's about like what management system is and all the other things. And then we would like to discuss the data protection and cyber security through ISO lens. Because obviously we believe data protection and cyber security are 2 big components together, and it's much stronger when they are addressed together, and ISO is of the same opinion. So that's why we would like to use ISO as kind of the practice for this foundation. And thirdly, we would like to touch the basics of certification, obviously, and then after that, we would like to leave some room for questions and the discussion. So starting with the key concepts, I would like to hand it over to Jatin for the management system.
Right. Thanks a lot, Ayse. I hear a lot of echo. Ayse, can I request you to go on mute? Yeah, this is fantastic. All right. Now, before I talk about the management system concepts, let me share a little bit of my experience over the last 20 years in this industry. What I saw in these COVID times is, and I realized that there's been never a better time to be a cyber criminal. At the same time, there's never been a better time to be a cybersecurity professional. And there's been almost a constant fight between the attackers and the defenders. And in my opinion, the ones who are winning this battle are those who are proactive. The ones who are taking proactive actions to even sometimes follow an offensive approach to cybersecurity and data privacy. Those who are not waiting to be attacked, but are the ones who are actually already proactively attacking their adversaries. And in that experience, and specifically after 2020, we've come to a realization that you need a system. You need a proper foundation so that you are very sure the controls that you're putting in place and the privacy and security practices that you have within your organization are going to work. Now, that's where a management system is very, very helpful. And that's where the standards developed by ISO, and I'm particularly talking about the ISO 27001 and ISO 27701 or ISO 27018, which are interlinked, they all follow a very solid foundation of a management system. Now, what does a management system do? A management system helps you to align some of the things that you see on the screen. And these are also the reasons I have seen why some of the cyber and privacy implementations are either successful or not so successful. So it's about leadership, commitment, and governance. You have to have that commitment level from the top, have to have the right structure in place, and that's what a management system allows you to do. It gives you a step-by-step approach to come to a proper governance structure. But it also gives you a discipline of ways of implementing controls. It gives you a chance to discuss with the right stakeholders what you should try and protect, the appropriateness of the scope. It helps you to manage the risks. It helps you to allocate resources in a proper way. It also helps you to have a cyclic approach where you start by planning something, you implement, you check whether you've done the right implementation, and if not, improve upon things. And that is what brings overall a better maturity of your cyber and privacy management system. And that is what is endorsed in these ISO standards. And through this presentation, we're going to be talking about how you can achieve that. Ayse, back to you. You're on mute.
Yes. So yes, and we will just talk about the certification, and we're both representing a certification body, and obviously there are tons of definition for what certification is. So you can just Google it, and then you will come with a lot of definitions. And the definition we chose for today is just really it's a procedure that an independent party provides a confirmation that an organization conforms with certain standards based on the scope that is defined. However, as a certification body, we are strongly believing that certification itself is important for certain elements. However, it should, to realize the real benefit of improvement of a management system, that it should not be the purpose itself. We see a lot of organizations, when this becomes the purpose, they fulfill all the things that are perhaps required by a standard. However, a management system, a foundation, has much more to offer to an organization than the realized benefits for those organizations that just see it as a certificate on the wall. So that's really important that we wanted to highlight it today, that it is, if you would like to achieve an improvement culture, that's where you need to establish the foundation, to have the foundation, and use perhaps ISO as a framework to give you the guidance how to set it up. And certification would be a nice outcome, but compliance or certificate should not be the purpose itself. That's something we strongly believe. But also, we wanted to give you a bit of flavor why maybe some of your organizations are already certified, but why do organizations get certified in general? So today, the change is there. Everything is changing rapidly. And the lifespan of an organization has been really shrinking. So years back, maybe being a giant conglomerate meant a lot about the survival of an organization, but today organizations cannot survive without their ecosystems. So they need to make sure that they establish trust within their ecosystems with their stakeholders, regulators, consumers, customers, suppliers, and all the other parties that are involved. And all of these parties demand something different. And certification is one of the ways to really establish this trust and show accomplishment in certain areas of focus. That's why it's still a very credible and a good mechanism to address this, and also commonly used mechanism to address these, to articulate compliance or conformance against the standard, but also to show that you are in control and build trust and confidence in the market, but also create some efficiency as well in the way the organization is dealing with certain communities or certain stakeholders. Like, I can give an example of an organization where sales was really pushing very hard to bring new clients, and the back office had to really keep up with this pace. This is a service organization, and then they had to really look for kind of filling in the checklists that were like different from every client they had. And also IT was just trying to keep up with that. There was also global pressure, regulators' eye was on them, and they chose for certification in the area of cybersecurity and privacy, at least to cover most of the questions with one answer and with one document. So that's generally why some organizations are going through this certification process.
What you're saying, Ayse,
yes.
What you're saying is, there's the ISO standard, there are the frameworks. A lot of organizations implement those frameworks. Then they choose to get certified because it's nice to have a certificate on the wall to use it as a marketing tool. What you're saying is that times have changed, because it's no longer just to be certified. It's also how you can make better benefits out of your management system. So do not just stop when you're certified. Take the benefits of your management system to be more proactive, to bring that discipline, to be able to, really dig into what you're doing on the ground, and not just rely on a piece of paper. Is that the message?
That's exactly correct. And this is a nice link to what I'm going to say as well, because like data protection and cybersecurity are two topics. And I have seen like legal teams working on data protection, just because now if you are in a global organization, you have so many regulations to comply with. It's GDPR, POPI Act in South Africa, Brazilian Act is coming. And then there's also Indian bill, like a lot of things are on our way, and organizations are really like trying to just stay compliant. And then also cybersecurity teams, like the technical teams, they are just like working very hard on the controls, and having such a management system. So that's where the benefit is coming from. Also breaks those types of silos, because it pushes the organization to work in an integrated manner, especially like these new type of standards that ISO is also has been just pushing out, like the 27701, indeed, like Jatin, you have mentioned at the very beginning. So that's why it's about integration and working together as well for all these functions. So that's why indeed it will create a lot of efficiency within an organization if it's really done in the right way, and if it's set in with the right foundation, actually. So having said that, obviously, I think most of you perhaps are very familiar with 2701. Of course, I'm not going to repeat what it is, but for those ones who are maybe less familiar with, it is an information security management system, and it is also a prerequisite for 27701, which is a privacy extension of the standard. And this is already, I think, as a good proof as well why it is important to have the information security, cybersecurity side together with privacy, because we cannot ensure data protection. You cannot protect your data without the right cybersecurity measures in place. And ISO is thinking the same way. That's why they have put the privacy extension for the privacy extension, the Information Security Management System 2701, the traditional one, as a prerequisite, because organizations need to have the hygiene set up, the foundation, the controls, to make sure they can also be competent enough to manage the privacy controls on top of it. And if you look at the ISMS very briefly, if you are familiar with the ISO, I think you will be familiar with this cycle as well. So it's focused on continuous improvement, taking all the interested parties together and managing information security in the right way. And it has certain clauses that gives the direction to the foundation. So the elements that Jatin has mentioned, from the context of the organization to leadership, planning, support. So this is the general structure from clause 4 to 10 of ISMS, which is supported by some controls in the information security, cybersecurity actually, to really set organization up for the right foundation and the right framework to use as the basis. Not, of course, not limited to, perhaps, because your organization, your industry might require additional customization, new things, but this gives a good basis to an organization for the information security. So that's why this is the prerequisite of establishing the privacy standard for ISO. So I would like to also just, we also thought of giving you some practical examples how cybersecurity and data privacy are interlinked with each other, and how data protection can only be ensured if you also have the right security measures in place. Jatin, maybe to you.
Yeah, if you go one step back, Ayse, and again, I'm getting echo from your side if you go on mute. So can you go on the previous slide? I do want to mention one thing. If you look at the cycle, this is exactly the same cycle that the ISO 27701 also talks about, the establish, implement, maintain, and improve cycle. Many organizations, they tend to look at this from a GRC perspective, governance, risk, and compliance. This is typically ISO certification is an initiative done by the compliance side of the organization. And then there's a completely different side on the right. Let's say it's the cybersecurity and the data privacy, where you're operating in a very different way. And I've seen many examples like this. An organization having a certificate, piles of documents, they comply to the requirements of the standard, but when you go in reality, things are very, very different. And that's what the message is. You have to understand what data you have and how you're protecting, and try to bring it into reality and not just do things for the sake of certification. Now, if I look at this cycle, let me try and paint a picture for you from a cyber world and privacy world. When we talk about establishing the ISMS, it's nothing but, from a cyber and privacy point of view, the identify phase and the protect phase. It's very, very important that you identify what do you do, what businesses you're in, what kind of products and services you offer, what kind of data you have, and where that data resides. And all of that you can do when you have a proper context of the organization. If you do not know what you have, how can you protect it? If you do not know where your data resides, you would not know what is happening in that environment. And if you do not know what is happening in your environment, you would not know how to implement controls. And that's where data breaches happen. That's where security incidents happen. So establish is about identify and protect, whereas implement, it takes the protection to the next level where you're starting to actually operate with a management system. When you talk about maintaining, that's where you talk about a lot of detection mechanism. Organizations are outsourcing that detect mechanism to SOC, external SOC, they're doing internal monitoring. But you know what? Monitoring is something important, but I would say it's old school these days. In 2020, again, I've realized that monitoring, by the time you have received an alert, it's already too late. So you have to have a mechanism to be more proactive. If an incident has happened, that means your defenses haven't worked. If you have to respond to an incident, that means somewhere something has gone wrong in understanding where the data is and how it's protected. And hence, you need to then go back to how you respond to that incident, and from there on, how you improve on it. And with that background, let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the examples. Again, data cannot be protected without having a proper secure environment. And to secure the environment, you have to have some of the basic things like access control. If you're not doing access control, if you don't have, let's say, a two-factor authentication in your environment, specifically to protect the very, very critical and sensitive data, then you're waiting for a chance to be attacked. Whereas more proactive organizations, they're using this mechanism of ISO 27001, 27701 to understand what kind of access, to have proper separation of duties, to have need-to-know principles implemented. And that ultimately leads to the protection of the data. And that data can be PII kind of data, so it can be private data, but it can be also very confidential information, which is not private, but still very important for your organization. So access control, backups, cryptography, these are some of the very basic controls which are talked about in the ISO 27001 and 27701 standard. And they actually help you improve your baseline. And once you've improved the baseline, you have a stronger foundation, you go next level. And every year you're following that cycle, you lead to a more mature status. And that's what I think Ayse talked about when she said continual improvement. It's a journey. You cannot expect on the very first day you've implemented a system that it will work. It takes years to become mature. It takes a lot of commitment. So I've seen organizations starting with a very basic baseline security, then going to more integrated approach where they start to talk about integration of their tools and techniques, their policies and procedures. Then they go more towards simplifying their operations, and then they start disrupting. And disruption is when you start to take an offensive approach. Again, I'm talking about that because there you're not waiting to be attacked. You're actually taking the framework of ISO, using the mechanism and the machine you've developed to be more proactive. And that's where privacy and information security go hand in hand. You have to be more secure from an information security point of view to safeguard the privacy of the information. Ayse, back to you.
Thanks, Jatin. Yeah, indeed, that's quite important to really set the right level of control. So when we talk about data, it's not only like compliance with certain regulation or really like working with legal checklists, or it's not really just also setting the controls, but like really having the kind of the holistic thing and the integrated mindset. That's really important. And we will get back to that as well in the upcoming slides, because that integrated approach is really the next level, but it helps the organizations very much to look at all frameworks and everything they have been doing and then look at that in an integrated manner, because then the organization will be having this proactive approach towards this, and that will be showing the maturity also, because as we have been seeing different levels of organization with different levels of maturities, this really makes a difference in the cybersecurity, but also when it comes to data privacy. So now setting the scene with like how important, why ISO 27701 is prerequisite to ISO 27701, which is the privacy extension. It's the privacy standard of ISO. Now I would like to just like talk a bit about what it is about and what type of clauses it has and how it's structured and some specific characteristics of the standard. Obviously, it is not that new anymore, but it's still quite new relatively compared to the other standards of ISO. And indeed, this standard uses the certain other standards as the basis. So that's why you will see a lot of mapping to the other standards or references to the other standards within the structure. So what is very important about this standard, because I know there are always questions like, is this the GDPR certification, or how is it like, is it only helping you to be compliant with GDPR? Like, this is really a jurisdiction neutral standard. So because personally I'm working a lot with different regulations globally, and we have a lot of mapping between these regulations like CCPA and all the others. And I can tell you that because this has the GDPR mapping, you can also easily map it to any other applicable law for your own organization. I'm talking about obviously the controls that are within the standard. If you look at the structure in detail, there are two clauses that gives reference to 27001 and then 27002 based on the guidelines and the requirements. Obviously, the standard takes the information security part as a basis and makes additions for privacy-specific topics on the same matter, actually, and that gives a good guideline on what needs to be built on top of the cybersecurity for that specific requirement. And on the separate two clauses, clause 7 and clause 8, there are two different sets of guidance for PII controllers and as well as PII processors, and these are slightly different, and I will give a few examples about that. And then the standard also includes like several annexes, which is slightly different than ISO 27001. The first one is all the applicable controls for the controllers, PII controllers, and the second annex is the full list of the processors controls. And then there is also certain mappings to certain standards, as you see here, and as well as GDPR. But as I said, because GDPR is easily to be mapped, like if I would compare GDPR to POPI Act, I would say in South Africa, I would say perhaps like maybe only 20% is not covered and slightly different. And the same goes for the Brazilian Act. So that's why this is really a jurisdiction neutral standard. And in the standard, it says you will also see the language when you get familiar with it, that it does not like direct you to a specific regulation, but it says that take all the all the applicable regulations and then apply XX. So that's why that really helps the organizations to if you are dealing with multiple regulations and different jurisdictions, this can also give you a good foundation, an organizational foundation to really work on.
Ayse, I just want to remind everybody who's attending this that they can also put their questions already in the chat, and we'll try and answer those and not to wait until the end of this call. But I do have a question for you, Ayse. If I'm certified on ISO 27701, does it mean that I'm GDPR compliant, and can I escape getting fines from the Data Protection Authority?
Unfortunately not. But even if you would be GDPR certified, I think this does not. I think GDPR talks about a bit of potential discounts on certain fines, but it does not even direct you. But this is not the GDPR certification itself. And that's a separate scheme, and that's work in progress for, I think, within EU member states, every country has a different way of tackling with that part. But certainly, a direct answer to your question, this does not show that you are GDPR compliant. This shows that you have a good foundation, and you, as an organization, is capable of managing privacy. So that's what it talks about. But then let this be GDPR or any other applicable laws. And actually, as we said at the beginning, certificate would be, again, an outcome, a good outcome to demonstrate that. But the idea is that you as an organization would be able to really set this foundation up to whatever new regulation will come, you will have the mechanism to capture it and then put it in your framework. So I think that's the beauty of the standard that we see, especially the global organizations they were more or less the first ones to reach out to us and then have the discussions and to get certified. And there is a reason to that, because GDPR certification, waiting for GDPR certification, they said might take time. And also because they are global, GDPR is not their only focus. So they needed something to give them the comfort and the confidence that they are good in privacy management and then are able to really keep in control when it comes to all different regulations. So, but obviously GDPR certification is one of the tools that countries are working on. Code of conducts are, some industry groups are working on, and we're part of those discussions as well. But nothing is really kind of tangibly published yet, or is at this maturity. So ISO really picked up as the first one to really tackle with privacy in this manner, to give the organizations a tool to get certified on. But obviously, we're also quite curious about the future on GDPR certification and on other developments, which we are also part of as a certification body, but there are different developments around that actually in different member states.
So a certificate might not give you that ticket to say to the authorities that, look, I was certified, so don't give me fines. But it can prepare you to have a conversation with them, to tell them, like, look, I have a system in place. I did everything that I possibly could to prevent a data breach. I even have a system to properly notify you. I have roles and responsibilities defined. I know what accountabilities are. I have a proper set of controls defined. And here they are. And, looking at that, perhaps authority could say, you've done whatever you could best do. However, you still got breached. There might be fines, but there can be some relaxation. Is that the right summary?
Yes, a good summary. Thanks, Jatin. Yes, that's correct. So, yes, that's about the structure. As Jatin has mentioned, please feel free to ask if you have any questions. So, the framework is also quite simple, and we have the same cycle like ISO 27001. So the continual improvement concept is also part of the privacy management system. And there are certain key processes, like obviously, like ISMS scoping is quite key. And here also, and the difference is that also you need to assess your role as a controller, as a processor, and those types of different questions come along in the scoping discussions. And stakeholders might slightly be different, and that needs to be assessed carefully, as well as risk management is similar, but there are certain requirements that come with it. Internal audit is a must-have, like all other ISO standards, and any gaps needs to be addressed as part of. There should be mechanisms to capture the gaps within the organization and address them. And obviously, what is very important, that as a preventive measures, the policies, procedures towards security and privacy should be in place. And obviously the difference and the specific to privacy, as I mentioned, the security policies are to be extended to also include privacy wherever it is applicable and it is possible, obviously. And assuming that, obviously, it is also possible, Jatin, because that's a common question that we get. Do we keep ISMS and PIMS separate as two separate management systems or combined? So obviously the most efficient and effective way is to do it combined. So extending and updating the policies, the security policies, and really kind of extending will be much effective and much easier, because I think it will be most efficient when it is done in an integrated manner. And the other one that's a good question is the organization, a PII controller or a processor, or the scope that you would like to establish the management system for, like the management system. You need to also think what is the most beneficial to your organization, that you take the processing activities in scope, or then taking you as kind of controller as kind of as a separate scope for the ISO management system.
I just wanted to give my 2 cents here, Ayse. Scoping is very, very important, and we've been highlighting that. Some of the questions that we ask our clients while helping them in terms of scoping, ask these questions to yourself if you're very curious. Identify what you do, like I previously mentioned. So what are your products and services? Very, very important. Who do you provide these services to? Whose private information you might be storing? Where do you provide these services from? So physical location, logical locations, put that in your scope. When do you provide these services? Do you have a 24/7 operation, or on a particular time of the year, or a particular time in a day? How do your products and services depend on this information, this data that you're trying to protect? And then document why this is important to be protected. A very common way of doing this is described in a PESTLE model, PESTLE. P stands for identify your political context. Are you politically very, very important for somebody to get your data, to have a data breach? understand your economical situation and economical context, understand your social context. So what kind of data do you have and what kind of societal impact it might have if there is a data breach? And we talk about privacy. Privacy is considered to be a right in society, right? And that's often I'm asked, what's the difference between privacy and confidentiality? I say privacy is a right of someone's private information and privacy to be protected, whereas confidentiality is much more than just a private privacy right. It's about protecting any information, including private information. So we were talking about PESTLE models of political, economical, social, technological. So T stands for technological, L stands for legal, and E stands for environmental. Look into these kinds of questions while you're scoping, because once you have your scoping and your context of the organization defined properly, everything depends on that. Your risk management will be done on your scoping. If you've missed out a data repository, you have a legacy server that you did not include in your inventory, if you did not know where your data is residing on cloud and you did not include it in the scope, you will not be able to perform a proper risk assessment. And a risk assessment includes identifying assets, performing a proper threat assessment, and then looking at your vulnerabilities and addressing those vulnerabilities. Just wanted to give my 2 cents there. Back to you, Ayse.
Yes, actually, this goes back to the very early conversation about the question we asked. So that's really important. These are very basic questions that every organization should ask to themselves, and this really helps, like what type of data you have, what are the activities that you are doing, like really just like going back to basics, and then really just like pushing yourself to think about it before you just like start building controls and frameworks on top of it. So that's really important. That's why scoping is generally undermined as a perception, but we always believe that it is one of the most important activities within the management system while establishing the management system. And it's an important success factor. When scope is set right, then the management system, it's very hard to fail the management system afterwards.
And that scoping has to be the same for both the privacy side, but also for the cyber side. And like we discussed, they go hand in hand. You cannot de-link them. You cannot have privacy established in an unsafe environment. You have to protect the environment. You have to not only look at the information and data, but also where this information and data resides. And typically there are 3 kinds of containers I think about. There are people containers. We as people can process, store, transmit information, but there are also technological containers like the servers, the laptops, mobile phones, right? And then there are object containers, which I call as, let's say, papers. Papers are object containers. Think about 3 kinds of containers. Think about the kind of information and the data that resides, and then think about the environment, who has physical or logical access to the environment, and how one can have access to it. But also think about, again, I do a lot of forensics investigations these days, and often I find that people who've had a ransomware attack did not even know that they had that data until it was surfacing on the dark web, right? An example could be administrative credentials. They've been sold for $5 on dark web, right? And people did not know that they were stored in an unencrypted repository which had to be protected. And because of this, a lot of private data got leaked. Now, if you had a 2-factor authentication implemented there, it significantly reduces the chances of a breach. You're making it very, very difficult for an attacker to attack that because you have 2-factor authentication. So it's important that you have an integrated approach to both the 27001 and 27701, or in other words, information security, cybersecurity, and data privacy. And to that, I also answered Ferry's question. Ferry, you asked if it's possible to achieve 27701 certification without 27001. The reason is that, like I just explained, you cannot. Back to you, Ayse.
Yes, and it's really is clearly defined also by ISO that it's the prerequisite. So the certification goes hand in hand with the setup of the standard as well. So actually, I would like to just give a few examples. I'm not gonna just take a lot of time here because you will be also receiving the deck afterwards. But just like to familiarize yourself with a bit of like how the controls look like in this new standard. So first of all, I would like to start with the structure on the right-hand side. So both controller controls as well as processor controls have the same sections. So it focuses on the collection and the processing, obligations to PII principles, privacy by design, and privacy by default, where you have more generic controls, and then obviously the data sharing, transfer, and the disclosure part. And the same goes for, as I said, like, so one is like clause 7 and the other one is 8. And also in the NXA and NXB, both like just follows this structure. So this is a controller example, and obviously PIAs, the privacy impact assessments, are an important part of GDPR as well. And also the standard, the clause 725, as an example, asks for the assessment of the need when there is a change in the activities. Like the processing of PII or the changes to the existing processing activities. So that's why it is important. The standard asks us for the completion of PII installations by taking the types of PIIs into consideration, and the locations where it's stored or where it's transferred to, and the risks and controls related to the PII processing. So we just chose this example also to show how it's kind of tangibly linked with GDPR, because privacy impact assessments are really a key component of GDPR itself, and this is one of the controls that are mentioned for controllers in the standard. So if we move to the processor clause 8, so as an example here, again, the contracts, like, so this is about the usage of data, PII, for purposes of marketing and advertising, which is also without the proper consent. So the consent is an important topic, again, for any regulation, not only for GDPR, but all equivalent regulations, that it is important that proper consent separately, an express consent has been obtained before working with marketing and advertising usage of data, PII data. And the last mapping that we have included is a clear map of like 858 to kind of to the article of 28, the usage of subcontractors to process PII information, and GDPR is also very clear to that. And as I have mentioned earlier, this can be also very easily mapped to other regulatory requirements like CCPA, HIPAA, and all the others that are existing today. So,
I say a quick time check. Maybe we can wrap up this section in next 2-3 minutes, and then we can take the questions.
Yes, exactly. So that's good, that because we only have 2 slides left. So briefly, and I think if you're already certified, you're very familiar with this process. So a certification process starts with the scoping, and then because we have talked a lot about certification, pre-assessment is optional. If an organization wants to have a kind of a pre-check before the external auditors get in, so then the pre-assessment can be done, and then this will give the organization the opportunity to close the gaps before the actual audit is happening, which is called the initial audit in year 1. Hopefully, obviously, if the conformance is there, the delivery of the certificate will be the following thing in the first year. And then in the upcoming 2nd and the 3rd years, there will be audits where the status will be monitored through, and this is called surveillance audits. And the 4th year, so certification is a 3-year cycle, which is followed with a recertification in the 4th year. So this is a very standard process, and we just wanted to share this, like to make you familiar with that as well, if you are not. And we also wanted to include the common pitfalls in certification readiness. And right scope, Jatin already covered that. So we see that sometimes organizations go way too ambitious. They say that, okay, I want to put the full globe into scope. I want to go globally, and that's not always realistic, and that's also signing up for failure from the very beginning. And sometimes it's also too little to really meet the purpose of the objective of the standard or the certificate itself based on. So that needs to be really very well checked and established. And the other thing that we see very commonly when we are going to the initial audit, there are really key mandatory documents. And it's really important to have them ready before the audit starts, because with that, it would not be possible to form a positive decision on the certificate. And the other one that's not like a showstopper, but we thought it's also important to highlight, it's the inadequate integration of I put the 27701 here, but it could be any standard that you will be certified for with the existing frameworks. If you're already, I don't know, like get third-party reports or other types of frameworks that you follow, other regulatory frameworks like HTS or anything could be, then it's important to really have that integration and then really just leveraging from that as much as possible. And the fourth one, that's also something we see, especially the organizations that are really technically very proud, which is a very important thing because we believe security controls are quite important. However, it's not the only thing that should be done, because clauses, the management system itself, all these components that we discussed are really quite key in the success of the certification. Also to know, so you cannot just like have the Annex A controls ready and then expect to be certified at the end. And buy-in, the management buy-in is quite key, like all other projects, I believe. And also for this one, because there are certain responsibilities on management that are asked by the ISO. And the other thing is that what we see as a common pitfall is that we think that sometimes GRC tool is really kind of this magical thing that will make everything work. However, tool is something we appreciate. However, it does not mean that you have a tool that will just help you to just get certified or be ready for certification. It's just something to support your processes. And as I said earlier, internal audit is also a very key one. Without internal audit, you cannot get certified. And the last but not least, right competence is very important, especially on PIMS and ISMS. We have been to organizations where there were great lawyers that knew the regulations inside out. And then there were great technical people that really knew the controls, all the establishment. However, if there is no one with the ISO background and that knowledge, at least having that sufficient knowledge and competence, then all the big elements of the management system might be missed. So that's why it's also really important to really assess that competence, right competence for the purpose of the work. So that's what I just wanted to mention briefly about what we see as the common pitfalls in the certification readiness. So I don't know, Jatin, if you have anything to add, or we can also take a few questions maybe.
I think for the sake of time, the questions.
I actually have one. Initially, you guys stated that there's no certification that can ensure you are GDPR compliant. Are you guys aware of any future certification that might prove GDPR compliance?
Certification is, it's not that silver bullet, unfortunately, that can protect you or that can give you a kind of a short assurance that, nothing wrong will happen. Certification is simply a third-party assessment deliverable, which says that somebody who's completely independent, somebody who's an auditor, has looked at what has been your implementation of controls and management systems, security practices, privacy practices, and that it meets a certain criteria. Now, whenever we do these kinds of certifications, our criteria is ISO standard. Whenever you're going through a SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3 kind of a reporting, which is an assurance report typically signed by a certified public accountant, there is a different criteria. At the end of the day, you're simply providing a certification to prove that somebody independent has looked at how we are doing and they feel it's sufficiently meeting the criteria. But can it prevent you from having data breaches? No. Can it prevent you from getting fines? No. And I don't think there is anything that can. In future, Nico, there will be a GDPR certification scheme. We are working on that ourselves. The Dutch DPA, Autoriteitspersoonsgegevens, is also looking at having licensed certification bodies do GDPR certification in future, and having a mechanism with the European Data Protection Board. It will come out. It's taken some time. And due to a lack of such a formal mechanism, ISO 27701 is an in-between solution. It at least helps you put the foundation right. But I don't think, and I don't foresee, there will be anything in future that can make you completely proof and prevent you completely from any breaches. Hope that answers your question.
It does. Thanks, Jatin.
Any other questions? Please feel free to speak up or put it in your chat window.
Okay, I don't see anything else. So unless anything pops up in the next few minutes, I think we can call that a night. Thank you very much for everyone for joining. As always, keep in mind that we're also running a webinar again next week. I hope everyone has a fantastic evening and a lovely weekend, and enjoy King's Day on Tuesday.